Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. Up first, we've got hazardous weather, and there's a winter storm warning out for tonight for the Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast, Norton Sound there, up into Galena. That's out through tonight, as well as a winter weather advisory over the inland areas of the Seward Peninsula for continued gusty winds, blowing snow, and reduced visibilities in that area, with winds gusting 30 to 55 miles per hour. And then the winter storm warning up to the north there, Kobuk Valley, Ambler, back to the northwest coast, Shishmaref, that's out until through tomorrow morning, and then slowly ending in the afternoon. Also, winter weather advisory out for the eastern North Slope for tonight through Friday for 3 inches of snow and gusts of 40 miles an hour, reducing visibilities and blowing snow to less than a half mile at times there. Otherwise, for the, east of Fairbanks there, Upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country in the Alaska Range, that's a wind advisory which is out for tonight into tomorrow morning for winds gusting 60 miles an hour and then subsiding, and then a winter weather advisory there for the Upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, Northway, Tok on up to Eagle, and that's out Saturday and Saturday night, actually, looking for possibly 4 to 7 inches of snow with winds gusting 35 miles an hour. Of course, the snow with those winds will reduce visibilities considerably, especially over the higher terrain. And moving on to satellite imaging, you can see a pretty intense low, or rather intense low, that crossed the Alaska Peninsula yesterday, moved across the southwest interior, and brought pretty strong winds to northeast Bristol Bay, actually the southwest coast, late last night, early this morning. That system moving quite rapidly into Norton Sound, central Norton Sound, by mid-afternoon today, and about to make landfall on the south coast of the Seward Peninsula, slowly weakening. And then you can see another batch of showers. Actually, that's a leading edge, some colder air, lower freezing levels. They're coming across the eastern Aleutians. Actually, that system crossed the central Aleutians yesterday, Adak and Atka, and you can see it pushing into the Alaska Peninsula now. And then a weaker system south of Kodiak, spreading a lot of moisture northward across the Gulf of Alaska, right up into the north coast. Still rain, actually, some of that linking up with the frontal boundary of that system over Norton Sound. And rain continuing to fall at Seward, and wet snow falling in the Valdez area, with Kodiak clearing out this afternoon behind the front. You can see some clearing there that extends back to the Alaska Peninsula Aleutian Range area, northeast Bristol Bay. But they picked up about 92 hundredths of an inch of precipitation. That's a 24-hour amount. Heavier amount up on the east side of Iliamna Lake, Pedro Bay picked up 1.5 inches, and about 0.6 of an inch falling at Seward. Pretty dry day over the Panhandle with some sunshine central and southern areas, mid and high level clouds to the north, and the next system pushing eastward. Today, Cape Newnham, 87 mile per hour wind gust, peak wind gust there on the, that was the strongest wind gust I could find there on the southwest coast, kind of exposed area there. And then Killay Creek, which is south of Sparrowvon over toward the western Alaska Range, they're at about the 1,900 foot level, just under 2,000 feet. They had a peak wind gust of 84 miles per hour, while Sparrowvon was close to 60 miles an hour farther to the north. Koliganek, 62 miles an hour, and Togiak had a wind gust of 60 miles an hour. And even McGrath, kind of a unusual wind gust there of 53 miles per hour. That low on the chart today, again, just making landfall this afternoon on the Seward Peninsula. Snow and blowing snow, maybe even some mixed precipitation occurring up over the west central interior. But snow and blowing snow up across the western interior north as that moves northward, improving from south to north. You can see clearing and light winds, dry day, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay into Kodiak Island. But more moisture just poised to move in later tonight there for Kodiak, and out to the west, the next system moving precipitation will bring a big increase in the winds and precipitation tonight, and that will push toward AKwx later tonight with gale and possible storm force winds in advance of that front. Otherwise, off to the east, high pressure, light winds, dry conditions, clearing on the increase there. Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula, up to the Pribilofs, and even the southwest coast. Much light winds becoming light, maybe even variable, with diminishing snow showers, and that low moves up to the northwest coast and continues to weaken, but holds together enough for snow and blowing snow there from the Seward Peninsula into the Kobuk, northern Koyukuk Valley, across the Brooks Range to the eastern Arctic coast. And low pressure moving just east of Kodiak. That'll spread the moisture back in, especially on the east side of the island, in the form of rain or snow, depending on your elevation. And also up to the North Gulf Coast, and increase the precipitation along the coast of the Panhandle as well, staying dry down to the south with chance of snow all the way up into the Copper River Basin to about the Alaska Range. And for Saturday, widespread area light snow possible, or snow showers from the North Gulf Coast will be mixed with rain all the way up to the Arctic coast. Will definitely just be snow up there. And the next system pulling north of the western Aleutians, that thing going northward slowly, and the front pushing eastward, weakening as it moves eastward, still holding together well enough for gale force winds into AKwx and Atka, and possible storm force gusts early on, but that front will be weakening and very windy back to the western Aleutians. And look for rain to be on the increase of that low pulling up to the Kenai Peninsula again for the North Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle. High pressure clearing it out. Eastern Aleutians, Bristol Bay. And look for afternoon clearing Kodiak Island as that low pulls northward. Those winds swing around to the west-northwest. So afternoon sunshine definitely possible there. Then for Sunday, high pressure dominates interior Alaska with some lingering but decreasing snow shower activity over the eastern part of the state toward the border. A front draped across the northern Panhandle keeps it occasionally wet and unsettled there, but wind's not much of a factor. And that front really weakens as it approaches the Fox Islands, barely pushing precip into the Pribilof Islands. And the wind's no longer a factor with that frontal system as the main low center stays west and moves northward toward the Russian coast. And winds, clouds will be on the increase, Kodiak Island. Looking at lows for tonight, near zero on the Arctic coast, in the North Slope, a little below zero, Yukon Flats up to Arctic Village. Single numbers for the central Tanana Valley to one below at Northway or Tok. And in the 20s to lower 30s, southern Alaska, mid-20s to mid-30s for the lows in the Panhandle, and upper 20s to lower 30s out over the Aleutians of the Bering Sea. Highs tomorrow in the 30s, Bristol Bay, upper 30s Alaska Peninsula to lower 40s over the Aleutians, and 30 to 35 southern Alaska, 25 to 32 over the central interior, with 15 to 20 for the highs for the Brooks Range, maybe into the 25 to 30 degree range for the North Slope. Otherwise in the 40s for the Panhandle. Lows Sunday morning below zero western Arctic coast, and either side of zero down into the northern interior valleys there just south of the Brooks Range. 10 to 15 for the lows central interior, in the 20s south central Alaska, southern Alaska, lower 20s Bristol Bay, and in the 30s all above freezing there for the Panhandle, right around 30 for Kodiak Island, lower 30s for the Aleutians, followed by highs near 40 in the central Aleutians to Unalaska, upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, lower 40s Kodiak Island, in the 30s southern Alaska, 20s to near 30 central interior, and a little below zero on the western Arctic coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather, VFR, North Slope Arctic coast. Some IFR, though, from about Point Lay on down, then covering Noatak Valley, northwest coast, all the Seward Peninsula, in eastward to the Kobuk Valley, southward along the lower Yukon River out to the Delta. VFR for the Kuskokwim Delta, VFR Nunivak Island, the Pribilofs, and from about Atka eastward to the Alaska Peninsula. Next big storm bringing a big batch IFR into AKwx out to Shimianatu. Another batch of IFR there from Kodiak Island up along the south coast of the Kenai Peninsula, covering Prince William Sound eastward to Yakutat and most of the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, Saturday afternoon, marginal VFR, interior Alaska, with some VFR to the northeast and southwest, especially over the eastern Bering Sea, all VFR right up to the Bering Strait, with the front pushing eastward across the southern Bering and toward the eastern Aleutians. We've got a band of IFR with that becomes more widespread out with the main low center farther to the west. IFR, North Gulf Coast, right on up across Kenai Peninsula, Northern Cook Inlet, Copper River Basin, into the Upper Tanana Valley, and then angling back toward Eagle. And solid IFR for the eastern North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And moving on to Sunday morning, that area of IFR along the northwest coast Saturday afternoon shifts eastward to the east central North Slope, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, becoming VFR across all of western Alaska from the Arctic coast there all the way down across Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. Southern Alaska, VFR, Kodiak Island into south central, and then some marginal VFR, eastern, northeastern Copper River Basin up across the Alaska Range, mid and upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, all marginal VFR right up to the eastern Yukon Flats, and IFR, Cape St. Elias eastward, covering all of the Panhandle in the eastern Gulf, and several bands of a couple of bands IFR out over the central and western Aleutians. Becomes pretty solid over the western and northwest Bering Sea. And for the afternoon, that area thins out some, but the one main band pushes eastward to the Pribilos from St. Matthew Island southward to Unmak Island. VFR from Atco westward to Chimionat 2, IFR up to St. Lawrence Island. Most of interior Alaska now VFR, some lingering marginal VFR there along the Yukon River. Otherwise, looking really good. IFR for the northern Panhandle, though, with marginal VFR over the southern two-thirds of the southeast coast. Manituvik, marginal VFR, occasionally marginal for Adigan as well. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal kind of Saturday coming up, as well as for Rainy, marginal VFR for Windy. IFR, though, for Isabel, actually windy right on the edge of the IFR zone, but Isabel in the thick of it, as is Mentasta. Tanita, IFR. Portage, IFR. Chilcoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels at the surface from around King Salmon, northeast Bristol Bay there, just north of Togiak, Cape Newenham, and then up into the Susitna Valley, northern Copper River Basin, and the Panhandle on the warm side of the surface there, 2,000 feet along the south coast of the Panhandle and the east side of Kodiak Island. Icing, southerly flow, another low coming northward up toward south central Alaska, so another round of considerable moderate rime icing in that flow as another surge pushes up into the North Gulf Coast. And then with a bigger storm out toward the western Bering Sea, we have got a zone of considerable moderate rime icing along in advance of the front, pushing across the central Aleutians. Isolated moderate mixed icing over the northwest part of the state from Norton Sound to the western Arctic coast. Jet stream, upper level low associated with that batch of moisture up there, west-northwest 75 knots across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, southwest 100 knots over the eastern interior, southwest 75 for the central Aleutians. 9,000 feet, pretty strong winds with that western Aleutian low, 60, 65 knots, 55 to as high as 75 knot winds there from the Gulf of Alaska to just north of Yakutat, and west-southwest 50 knots for the central Brooks Range, kind of a narrow band there. And 3,000 feet, 50 to 70 knot winds with the west-southwest Bering storm there, and stronger in advance of the front pushing toward the eastern Aleutians. Otherwise, that low lifting north to the Kenai Peninsula brings up 40 knot winds to the eastern North Gulf Coast, and then 35 knot winds up along the North Slope with that other system. And as far as turbulence goes, widespread considerable moderate turbulence advancing eastward there to the central Aleutians, otherwise light to isolated moderate chop eastern North Gulf Coast and the western Arctic coast.
Floating hundreds of miles from Earth, astronauts get a unique perspective of our planet. While they might recognize landmarks, space is the only place they can see the very edge of our planet's atmosphere.
From orbit, particularly looking at the horizon, did bring to mind how thin the atmosphere is. It's like an onion skin around this great big ball of the Earth.
This uppermost layer of Earth's atmosphere, the ionosphere, also overlaps with the very beginning of space. It's the job of NASA's new mission, GOLD, the Global Scale Observations of the Limmendisk Instrument, to study this region, a region that isn't just for astronauts to explore, but that affects humans every day down on the ground. For one thing, this layer of the upper atmosphere helps protect us from harmful radiation and energy emanating from the sun. But in our modern society, it does so much more. It affects the smartphone that sits in your pocket and the radio waves that guide our airplanes. The ionosphere is a crucial layer of the atmosphere through which our communications and GPS signals travel. And when this region changes, it impacts those communication signals. Changes can occur above this region from the sun's activity, also known as space weather. Changes can also occur below from Earth's weather, such as hurricanes and wind patterns. Gold connects the dots between how space weather and Earth's weather shape the upper reaches of the atmosphere. But this region isn't easy to study. The ionosphere spans roughly 60 to 400 miles from Earth's surface, which is too high for aircraft and scientific balloons, and the lower regions are too low to easily study with satellites. What are attainable, however, are the swaths of red and green light shining out from the upper atmosphere. Formed when the sun's rays hit atmospheric molecules, this light, named airglow, comes from green and red bands of glowing gas. Some of the airglow is invisible to our eyes, shining in infrared and ultraviolet light, which can only be seen with scientific instrumentation. Taking advantage of our planet's natural glow is gold. The gold instrument, which is about the size of a mini-fridge, is hitching a ride on a commercial communication satellite, SES-14. The satellite's orbit lies 22,000 miles above Earth, where it can record images in ultraviolet light to monitor changes in airglow across the globe. These images give information on the temperature, density, and composition of particles in the upper atmosphere. Gold collects these observations faster than any mission has ever done before. It captures an image of Earth's entire disk every 30 minutes, allowing scientists to see how the upper atmosphere evolves throughout the day. Gold joins a host of missions studying the very nature of space, around Earth, the Sun, and planets. As NASA ventures farther and farther from home, knowing the nature of space itself is crucial for our journey to understand our solar system and beyond.
There's a new class of chemical compounds impacting the Earth's ozone layer and raising concerns among some scientists. But a new NASA analysis indicates stratospheric ozone could actually be impacted more by climate change and the continued release of already banned chemicals. The Earth's ozone hole is showing signs of recovery, decades after the landmark agreement called the Montreal Protocol that banned many chemical compounds harmful to the ozone layer.
So we know the Montreal Protocol was a huge success. This was signed in the late 1980s when scientists and policymakers from around the world gathered together to try to save the ozone layer.
The chemicals they regulated persist in the atmosphere for many decades. They thin the ozone layer and they create a seasonal hole over Antarctica. They basically take away part of our planet's natural sunscreen, and that increases the risk of skin cancer and damage to plants.
Scientists have projected the ozone hole could disappear almost completely by about 2075, but several factors could delay that recovery.
There are some industrial compounds that are not banned by the Montreal Protocol, but as they enter the atmosphere, they will also hurt the ozone layer.
But the unregulated compounds have a short lifespan in the atmosphere, unlike the chlorofluorocarbons that were originally regulated. So they have a short-lived impact on ozone, and we don't think they'll delay recovery by more than a few years.
We projected by 2050, more than half of the ozone-depleting compounds in the atmosphere will come from long-lived substances banned by the protocol.
Because these compounds stay in the air for such a long time compared to the unregulated, short-lived compounds, they will have a disproportionate and lingering impact on ozone. So any non-compliance with the protocol can have significant consequences.
And the really big uncertainty in ozone layer recovery is climate change. There are many naturally produced ozone-depleting substances that are emitted by the oceans. And as the oceans continue to warm due to climate change, those emissions will increase, and that will further delay ozone recovery.
Scientists want to better understand how climate change will affect ozone recovery.
This is a hard problem. As a scientific community, we need to work on this major issue. We now have a powerful new tool to simulate atmosphere and its interaction with land and ocean to study this issue. And that's what we're going to do.
How can you see the atmosphere? The answer is blowing in the wind. Tiny particles known as aerosols are carried by the air around the globe. This visualization uses data from NASA satellites combined with our knowledge of physics and meteorology to track 3 aerosols: dust, smoke, and sea salt. Sea salt, shown here in blue, is picked up by winds passing over the ocean. As tropical storms and hurricanes form, the salt particles are concentrated into the spiraling shape we all recognize. With their movements, we can follow the formation of Hurricane Irma and see the dust from the Sahara, shown in tan, get washed out of the storm center by the rain. Advances in computing speed allow scientists to include more details of these physical processes in their simulations of how the aerosols interact with the storm systems. The increased resolution of the computer simulation is apparent in fine details like the hurricane bands spiraling counterclockwise. Computer simulations let us see how different processes fit together and evolve as a system. By using mathematical models to represent nature, we can separate the system into component parts and better understand the underlying physics of each. Today's research improves next year's weather forecasting ability. Hurricane Ophelia was very unusual. It headed northeast, pulling in Saharan dust and smoke from wildfires in Portugal, carrying both to Ireland and the UK. This aerosol interaction was very different from other storms of the season. As computing speed continues to increase, scientists will be able to bring more scientific details into the simulations, giving us a deeper understanding of our home planet.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecasts on the south coast of the Panhandle. Outer coastline, southwest winds 15 knots, seas around 10 feet. Stronger winds as you head north. North coast there, south 22 as high as 30 knots. And Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inside waters. South winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Stevens Passage, southeast winds 15 knots, seas 3 feet. And for Clarence Strait, winds southeast at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And moving on to Sunday, we've got small craft advisories for the northern inside waters there, Lynn Canal especially. For southeast winds coming up to 25 knots, seas building to about 5 feet. Stevens Passage, south at 20, 4-foot seas. Clarence Strait, light winds and slight seas from the south at about 10 knots. South coast, southwest at 15, and the north coast, south to southeast winds at 15 knots. Seas across the entire area there at 10 feet. Prince William Sound, small craft advisories, east winds 30 knots with 8-foot seas. And Middleton Island zone, eastern North Gulf Coast, south at 30 knots, seas 13 feet, southwest 25 for the western North Gulf Coast. Southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, north winds 25 knots, and northwest winds at 30 knots for the Barren Islands. Outlook for Sunday, northern Cook Inlet, light winds out of the north at 10 knots, 2-foot seas, but small craft advisories continue. Southern Cook Inlet at 25 knots from the north, northeast 25 for both the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay. Northeast winds 20 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Lighter winds in store for Prince William Sound on Sunday. Looking at northerlies at about 20 knots with 4-foot seas. Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And from Sitkinak all the way down to Cape Sarachev, Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 20 knots, seas around 10 feet. Bering Sea side of the peninsula, west winds at 20 knots. In Bristol Bay, westerly breeze at 15 knots with 4-foot seas. We'll swing around to the northeast and pick up to 25 knots for Bristol Bay on Sunday. And that extends all the way down the coastline to Cape Sarachev. And then the area from Cape Sarachev to Castle Cape, northeast at 30 knots. Gale warnings from Castle Cape to Sitkinak for northeast winds 35 knots. Kodiak Island, east-northeast, 30 knots, seas 10 to 12 feet. Fox Islands, Unalaska Island, southeast 25 knots tomorrow. Good gales for Unmac Island, southeast coming up 40 to 45 knots. Storm warnings for the central Aleutians from Atka and Adak to Amchitka for south to southeast winds 45 to 50 knots. Gale warnings Kiska to Shimia, southwest at 40 knots, seas around 20 feet. South 45 knots from Shimei to Kiska on Sunday. Otherwise, Amchitka Island coming down southwest 30 knots, 20 to 25 knot winds for Adak and Atka from the southwest. And for the Fox Islands, east to southeast winds or northeast winds, depending on which side of the islands you're on, at 25 to 30 knots. Yukon Delta coast tomorrow, light variable winds at 10 knots. Otherwise, Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island, westerlies at 20 knots, south 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, and southeast winds 25 knots for the Pribilofs, and the Kuskokwim Delta coast west at 15. And the outlook for Sunday, gale warnings for the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island, southeasterlies 30 to 35 knots, southeast 20 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, northeast 20 south of Nunivak Island, brisk wind advisories for St. Lawrence Island, southeast winds 30 knots. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, south winds 15 to 20 knots for Saturday, northeast 20 for the central coast, turning north at 20 on the west side, and then brisk wind advisories Cape Beaufort to Wales for north to northwest winds at 25 knots. And for Sunday, Wales to Cape Beaufort, east winds 10 to 15 knots. For the Arctic coast, central and west side, west winds at 10 to 15 knots, but gale warnings for the far eastern Arctic coast from Kaktovik to Demarcation Point, west winds 35 knots. For tonight, wind increases over the northwest interior and across the central and eastern Brooks Range, eastern north slope to the eastern Arctic coast with blowing snow developing, and conditions improving over the west coast from south to north slowly as that low moves to the northwest coast and slowly weakens. Big storm coming into the western Aleutians and southwest Bering Sea. Next system pushing more moisture up toward the North Gulf Coast. Kodiak Island continues northward to the Kenai Peninsula Saturday, with a widespread area of light snow or snow showers from the Kenai Peninsula, North Gulf Coast, all the way up to the Arctic coast, and some of that spilling into the northern central panhandle, improving for Kodiak Island and the eastern Aleutians. And that front really weakens as it makes its way toward the Fox Islands on Sunday, and the main low center pulls northward, and the slowly northward bound low affects Kodiak.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.